The first time my wife's assistant had the audacity to provoke me in person, I said nothing. I simply tilted my head toward the bodyguards. They knew what it meant. Lyra placed her hand softly on my arm. "He's young and doesn't know better," she said, her voice carrying the gentle warmth she always kept close to the surface. "Maybe let it go this once." I turned my palm over and covered her hand with mine. "I know," I said. "Young people make mistakes. Sometimes the only way they learn is if someone takes the time to teach them properly." The next evening, Lyra came home and walked straight to where I was sitting. She stopped in front of me, her face flushed, her voice sharp. "Damien." She stared at me. "When you said you were going to teach him properly," she paused, pressing her lips together as if steadying herself. "Did that mean knocking out 8 teeth and breaking 6 ribs?" Chapter 1. The first time I met Ronan was on an entirely unremarkable Wednesday afternoon. I had finished a meeting earlier than expected, and on a quiet impulse I decided to drive to Lyra's company and take her out for dinner. The receptionist recognized me at once. I made my way up to the 16th floor without a word of delay. Lyra's office door was slightly ajar. Through it came the clear, bright sound of her laughter, unguarded and real, the kind she gave freely when she was truly at ease. "Seriously? You know about that too?" I heard her say, pleasant surprise lifting the edges of her voice. I pushed the door open. She was sitting on the sofa, relaxed and comfortable, while a young man stood beside her, a tablet angled in his hands, leaning forward slightly to show her something on the screen. He was tall and lean. Fair-skinned. Gold-rimmed glasses. The precise, scholarly type. Lyra looked up the moment I entered. Her smile widened naturally. "Damien. What brings you here?" Before she could say another word, the young man spoke first. "That might be tricky tonight. We just started reviewing the proposal for the new project. We'll be lucky if we don't end up working overtime." Lyra rose smoothly from the sofa and came to my side, slipping her arm through mine with the ease of long habit. "Oh, right, let me introduce you too. This is Ronan, our newest department assistant. Ronan, this is my husband, Damien Cross." Ronan offered a respectful nod. "President Cross. It's an honor. President Vane speaks of you quite often." My eyes finally settled on him fully for the first time since walking in. Tall. Lean. Fair-skinned. Polished glasses. A professional smile that reached exactly as far as it was meant to reach, and no further. He stood there calm and composed, every gesture measured, every expression impeccable. Not a single flaw in his performance. "I came here to take my wife to dinner." And who the hell was he to say no? I had no interest in indulging him, regardless of how flawless he made himself appear. Ronan clearly hadn't anticipated such directness. He faltered for just a moment, a brief crack in the surface, before color crept slowly up his neck and into his face. I. All right, all right." Lyra stepped smoothly between the tension, her voice effortlessly cheerful. "My husband rarely has time to come pick me up. We'll review the proposal tomorrow. Organize the documents and head home after, okay?" She spoke to Ronan with light ease, then took my arm and steered me gently toward the door, already telling me something about a restaurant she'd been thinking about all week. Just before the office door clicked shut behind us, I glanced back through the narrowing gap. Ronan hadn't moved. He stood exactly where we'd left him, watching the door close, and in his eyes, behind all that careful composure, was a fury he hadn't managed to extinguish in time. His face was full of defiance. Naked and raw. I filed it away. Afterward, I learned the details. Ronan had graduated that same year, top marks, impressive credentials, a resume that opened doors. He had secured a position in the marketing department and, in the span of only 6 months, had climbed from intern to a desk on the 16th floor. Occasionally, Lyra would mention him in passing. "We hired a sharp one recently. Very driven. Ronan handled that difficult client today, saved us a real headache." I never offered much response to those observations. I had seen his eyes the moment the door began to close. He was not the type to stay where he was placed, and dangerous things are far easier to deal with before they take root. What I hadn't anticipated was that Ronan, before I even had a chance to act, would be the one to reach out first. Chapter 2. Several days later, a private gathering was held at my club, an intimate event, the usual crowd of old mutual friends. By the time I arrived, Lyra was already moving through the room, welcoming guests with the easy warmth she wore like a second skin. Ronan stood not far from her side. Tonight he was dressed differently, a perfectly tailored dark navy suit, shoes polished to a mirror shine, and on his wrists, cufflinks from a luxury brand whose newest collection ran well into 5 figures. For someone barely a year out of school, they had no business being there. President Cross. He spotted me and walked over immediately, wearing that same polished smile as though nothing had happened. Good evening. President Vane stepped out. She asked me to help welcome the guests. I waved him off. He didn't move. He lifted a champagne flute from a passing tray and positioned himself beside me with the easy confidence of someone who believed that space was his to occupy. President Cross, he said, his voice dropping just below the noise of the room, what do you think of my suit tonight? I found an empty chair and sat. He followed. This outfit, he continued, was actually a gift President Vane had prepared for you. But she thought I looked too plain for tonight, so she let me wear it first. I'll return it after the event, of course. More guests were filtering in through the entrance. I kept my voice low and my expression flat. I'm not the type to wear something another person has already used, I said. It feels unclean to me. I paused briefly. Once you take it off tonight, I'll have it altered into something for the dogs. Even unwanted things, I didn't leave for people like him to keep. His face moved through green and then pale, a slow tide of rage building beneath the surface. His eyes lit up with it. But he caught himself. He smoothed the expression back down and curved his lips into another smile. You're absolutely right. Men of your standing have every reason to be above second-hand things. He let the pause sit deliberately before leaning slightly closer, his voice dropping further. But I'm not like that. I find second-hand things interesting. More character to them. Another pause, weighted and deliberate. President Vane, for instance. Married for years already, but that face, that figure. He let out a soft, appreciative sound under his breath. Honestly. Far more attractive than most women half her age. President Cross, you might want to start feeling just a little insecure. I laughed. The fury that moved through me in that moment was so absolute and complete that it bypassed anger entirely and came out the other side as something cold and quiet. The smile faded from my face slowly, like light retreating from a room. You want to die? I said. Oh, I'm terrified. He crossed his arms and performed an exaggerated shudder, his expression wide and mocking. But this is a country with laws, isn't it? I don't actually believe you can do anything to me. He had dropped all pretense. His eyes were flat now, stripped clean of the performance. What remained was something hard and deliberate. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. Since he had stopped pretending, there was no reason for me to continue either. I smiled faintly and reached out to pat his cheek once, just once, the way you might acknowledge something small and harmless before stepping past it. You're still very young, I said. Let me show you exactly what I can do. I turned my head slightly toward the entrance. My bodyguards had been positioned in the far corner since the event began. The moment I moved, they came. Ronan's composure flickered for the first time. President Cross, what are you? Relax. My voice stayed even. That reckless attitude of yours needs correcting. Think of this as a learning experience. 2 of them had him by the arms before he could finish the thought, lifting him clear of the seat and steering him briskly toward the exit. His feet barely touched the floor. I turned back toward the room. My expression hadn't changed. From the corner of my eye I noticed the champagne glass still trembling in his grip as they dragged him away. I raised one finger without looking. Careful with the glass, I said mildly. A vintage that expensive, he'll likely never have the chance to taste again. Let him finish it first. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. Pried open his jaw. Tipped the rest of the glass cleanly down his throat. President Vane, help me, his shout cut through the nearest cluster of guests for just a moment before the crowd swallowed it whole. But they were already through the door. Chapter 3. A voice came from behind me. Damien. Lyra's hand touched my arm lightly. What happened? I just saw Ronan being. Nothing serious. I turned and reached up to brush a loose strand of hair from her shoulder. He said something he shouldn't have. I corrected him a little. Damien, her voice took on that soft, careful tone she used when she was trying to talk me around something. He's young. He just started out. Can't we give him another chance? Her gaze drifted past me toward the exit, and she was already beginning to plead on his behalf. I covered her hand with mine. Don't worry. Nothing will happen. I know my limits. The party continued. The small disturbance dissolved into the noise and warmth of the room, and no one was willing to let it ruin their evening. By the time the last guest departed, the night had passed without a trace. The following evening, I sat in my study by the window, a fountain pen turning slowly between my fingers. At 11:17, the front door was kicked open. Lyra's heels struck the hardwood in sharp, furious beats as she crossed the entrance and came straight to the study. Her face was flushed. Her eyes were red, as though she had been crying somewhere between the hospital and here. Damien. She stopped in the center of the room, her chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. You told me you were going to correct him a little. I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair. In all the years I had known her, I had never seen her look at me quite like this. That's right, I said. I corrected him a little. Her lips trembled. You call 8 broken teeth and 6 fractured ribs a little? She stared at me, waiting. When I said nothing, her voice rose. You had people do that to him. He's lying in a hospital bed right now getting stitched back together. The doctor said several ribs are broken and all his front teeth are gone. Her voice cracked on the last word. Damien, when did you become like this? I've always been like this, I replied. You just never had reason to see it. That was simply the truth. I had never been a man of gentle methods or quiet tolerance. I wouldn't have reached where I stood today if I were. She went still. The color changed in her face. Her voice, when it came again, had lost some of its sharpness, replaced by something quieter, more fragile. He works for my company. Even if something upset you, couldn't you have come to me first? You had someone beaten without a single word. That's too far, Damien. That's too. Let's get divorced. The words left my mouth flat and even, without weight. Lyra's face changed completely. She stared at me as if the room had tilted beneath her feet. Are you serious? You want a divorce over something like this? Is that what you think this is? I asked. Something small. Yes, she said, frustration bleeding into every syllable. There is nothing between him and me. He's a kid who just graduated. What is wrong with me helping someone like that? You can't beat a person half to death over your own paranoia, and you definitely cannot stand there and tell me you want a divorce over baseless suspicions. I know nothing has happened, I said, cutting through it cleanly. She went quiet. If something had already happened, you wouldn't be standing here unharmed, I said. But I don't wait until after the fire starts to deal with the kindling. Cutting danger down before it grows, that's who I am. That's who I've always been. She pressed her lips together, and the anger that had been fueling her began, slowly, to give way. Something else rose in its place, a panic she hadn't quite recognized yet as her own. Can't you be reasonable? I told you there is nothing between us. We've been together for years. Don't you trust me? I trusted the person you were, I said quietly. But you've changed. Chapter 4. The words settled into the silence like stones dropping into still water. Her eyes reddened. She drew a slow breath, crossed the room, and braced both hands flat against my desk, leaning down to look directly into my face. Damien. Her voice had softened to something close to desperate. I promise you, once he recovers, I'll have him transferred. I'll cut off all contact completely. Is that enough? I reached into my desk and withdrew a document. Her company's name was printed clearly across the front cover. She recognized it the moment her eyes touched the page. I could tell by the way her breath shifted. When she had first founded the company, we had signed an agreement. The core resources, the startup capital, the network of early connections, all of it had come through me. In exchange, I held a percentage of shares in her company. She had always understood that. She had never disputed it. Now I wanted the rest. I don't need verbal promises, I said. I placed a pen beside the document. If you two have any further contact, of any kind, the company becomes fully mine. Lyra stared at the paper. Then she looked at me. Somewhere beneath the hurt and the anger, she knew she was the one on unstable ground. She knew it with the clarity of someone who has just stepped back from an edge and can finally see the drop. If the situation were inverted, if it were me with a female assistant circling close, exchanging careful glances across a shared workspace, she wouldn't dare imagine the depths of her own fury. She was standing on shaky ground. And she knew it. Sign it, I said, and this ends here. No matter what came afterward, I needed what was mine secured in my hands first. She bit her lip softly. Then she reached forward, picked up the pen, and paused for just a moment, looking up at me one last time, the corners of her eyes still red. Damien, she said quietly. I really do love you. Then sign. She lowered her head and wrote her name in 2 clean, swift strokes. I won't contact him again, she said as she set the pen down. You can trust me. She left the study without another word. I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, soft and measured. Then the quiet click of the bedroom door closing. The villa went still. I looked at the signed agreement spread across my desk. Black words. White paper. Her name in ink. Everything clean and definitive. And yet I felt nothing resembling relief. I knew Lyra too well. People like Ronan, with their careful attentiveness, their perfectly timed words, knew exactly where to press to find her softness. She hadn't lied when she signed. She genuinely believed she could keep the promise she was making. But once that young man appeared again, once he turned those wounded eyes toward her, how much of tonight's resolve would remain standing? I didn't dare gamble on it. Chapter 5. For a while, things returned to something resembling the life we'd had before. Lyra would occasionally go to the hospital, to settle his bills, to bring him things he needed. Each time, she told me before she went. She said that once he was discharged, she would terminate his employment and sever all contact. I had people watching throughout. She was doing exactly what she said, delivering essentials, handling fees, nothing more. A month passed that way. One afternoon at the office, I was preparing to rest for a short while when my phone lit up with a new friend request. I accepted it without thinking. The other person responded immediately with a photo. A hospital room. White walls and the faint antiseptic stillness behind the frame. Ronan, still in his patient gown, bandages wrapped around his chest, holding up a bottle of red wine with one hand, grinning at the camera with the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he has just won something. Cross, didn't you say I'd never get to taste good wine again? What do you think of this one? Seems even better than yours. I stared at the photo for a long moment. With injuries like his, he absolutely should not have been drinking alcohol. His ribs were still healing. This was nothing but a direct and deliberate provocation, staged, calculated, sent with the full knowledge that I would receive it exactly the way I did. Was he genuinely not afraid? I put the phone in my pocket, called for my bodyguards, and drove to the hospital. When we entered his private room, Ronan didn't panic at the sight of us. If anything, he looked as though he had been expecting us. There was something almost satisfied in the way his expression settled when the door opened. Faster than I expected, he said. But I'd think twice before doing anything rash. President Vane went to handle the discharge paperwork. She'll be back soon. You're being discharged today, I said. I sat down beside the bed and continued at a comfortable pace. I came to give you a ride. He blinked. The easy confidence flickered, just slightly. I could see him working through it. He had spent months maneuvering himself into proximity with Lyra. He had cultivated every angle carefully, and he wasn't prepared to lose access now, not when he believed he was this close. So he had done the only thing left to him, baited me. Sent the photo. Expected me to arrive furious. Expected to be beaten again, to stay hospitalized a few more days, to buy himself more time to find another angle. What he hadn't planned for was a calm man sitting beside his bed offering to personally escort him home. Cough, cough, he shifted, affecting discomfort. The doctor said I need careful rest. Nutritious food. Complete wound care. My injuries absolutely cannot get wet. If they're exposed to water, there's a real risk of infection. It could become very serious. He rambled on, the subtext obvious. He was listing reasons why he needed to remain comfortable, cared for, close by. I heard only one sentence. His wounds couldn't get wet. Oh, I said pleasantly. So your wounds can't get wet. I crooked one finger. The bodyguards behind me moved without a sound. Then throw him in the sea. The color drained from his face instantly. He opened his mouth to shout, and one of the guards moved fast, sock pulled free, stuffed between his teeth before the sound could escape, and then he was trussed and carried out, muffled and kicking, into the waiting car. I remained in the room. Not long afterward, the door swung open and Lyra stepped inside, a folder of discharge paperwork tucked under her arm, her face bright with the practical satisfaction of having taken care of something. Everything sorted. We can. She stopped. The room was empty. I was sitting in the chair beside the stripped hospital bed, and there was no one else. Ma, where is, her voice tightened. Where's Ronan? Oh, I said, rising and draping my coat over my arm. After his discharge, I thought it would be good for him to wash off the bad luck. I had someone take him down to the coast for a bit. Chapter 6. The blood left her face completely. She stared at me as though I had suddenly become someone she had never met. Her lips parted. Nothing came out. Then, with enormous effort, the words arrived. Say that again. I had him taken to the sea, I said. He can soak for a while. She stepped backward. Once. Twice. She had been present when the doctor gave the discharge instructions. She knew exactly what water contact meant for wounds in his condition. She knew what this could do to a person. Damien, her voice cracked. Stop. You're joking. He will die. I said nothing. Damien. She crossed the room and grabbed my sleeve with both hands, holding on with a grip that trembled against the fabric. Tell me where they took him. She was panicking, but it was a specific kind of panic. Not the controlled worry of someone concerned about a subordinate's welfare. This was something else. This was the kind that lives in the body before the mind can rationalize it, the instinctive, headlong desperation to pull someone out of danger at any cost. Whatever you want, she said, her voice fracturing. Any condition. I'll agree to it. Just tell me where he is. I looked at her for a long moment. This was not the girl who used to call me after a single day apart just to say she missed me. I could see it plainly now, in the way her hands shook, in the way her eyes had gone past me entirely, reaching for something I could not follow her toward. Divorce, I said. She went very still. Divorce had never entered her thinking. I could see that clearly too. It hadn't been a word that existed in her version of this marriage. But now she stood in this hospital room with the image of him in the sea behind her eyes, and hesitation moved across her face like weather crossing open ground. Take your time, I said calmly. But from here to the coast, it's only about an hour. She looked at me. Something struggled within her, and came undone. Fine, she said. I'll sign. Have the lawyer send the papers. I'll sign right now. I had already prepared everything. I reached into my bag and withdrew a brown envelope. Inside was a divorce agreement, already drafted, already complete. 2 pages, clean and simple. I spread them across the hospital counter and set a pen beside them. She picked up the agreement, barely glancing at it, turned straight to the last page, and signed her name. Her hand didn't shake. I sent her a location on her phone. You should hurry, I said. I can't guarantee his condition if you're too late. She grabbed her bag and was through the door before I finished the sentence. Her heels rang down the hallway in quick, sharp beats that grew distant and then disappeared. I walked out to the terrace and stood in the night air. Below, the river moved in dark silence. The lights of the opposite bank scattered across the surface in broken, glittering pieces. I took out my phone and made a call. She's on her way. The voice on the other end came through layered with wind and the sound of moving water. Understood, President Cross. The sea in that season was still cold enough to bite. Before Lyra arrived, Ronan was going to have a deeply unpleasant time. Chapter 7. Based on the report I received afterward, by the time they pulled him out of the water, he was already unconscious. Soaked through, shivering at a cellular level, his lips gone purple, a head wound at his temple still seeping blood. Lyra's hands shook as she checked his breathing. Weak. Unsteady. But there. The bastard had incredible luck. The ambulance arrived quickly. On-site assessment, alive, but the head injury complicated things. Transfer to the ICU was necessary. His condition was listed as not optimistic. He stayed unconscious for 2 full days. During those 2 days, Lyra barely left the hospital. She slept in the chair beside the bed, woke at every sound, drank bad coffee from the vending machine down the hall, and refused to go home. On the morning of the 3rd day, at 5 in the morning, the heart monitor beeped differently. Lyra startled awake from the thin, restless sleep she'd been managing and turned to find the swollen eyes on the hospital bed had opened, barely, into narrow, unfocused slits. Ronan was awake. It took time for his vision to settle. He blinked slowly, working through the disorientation, until his gaze finally found her face. Then his hand, the one that could still move, lifted and came to rest, very lightly, against the back of the hand she had on the bedside rail. "President Vane," he rasped. His voice sounded like something half-destroyed and poorly repaired. "Have you been here the whole time?" She said nothing. She leaned across and pressed the call button. The doctors came and ran through their assessments. He was no longer in immediate danger. He would need continued monitoring and a great deal of rest, but the crisis had passed. After they left, he turned his head toward her again. His eyes carried something raw and wet, fear, relief, exhaustion, and beneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, a flicker of quiet triumph. She had stayed 2 full days and nights. She had chosen him over everything else. He had been right to bet on her. In spite of his injuries, in spite of everything, he couldn't help the smile that came. He began to cough almost immediately, the kind that shook his whole frame and set the monitors screaming. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. His body folded against itself with the force of it. Lyra poured warm water and handed it to him quickly. "What are you smiling at? You're barely conscious and you're still smiling." He took the cup from her, still catching his breath. "I just..." He coughed once more, softly. "I keep thinking about how good it is to see you again. I thought I never would." She reached over and pressed a tissue gently to the moisture at his face. "Stop talking. Lie down and rest. President Vane." He said her name quietly, and the playful edge he usually carried was entirely gone from his voice. He sounded small and honest and humble in a way that seemed almost foreign on him. "You saved my life." A pause. "I grew up without parents, you know. Raised by relatives who never really wanted me there. I worked my way through school alone. And since I entered the workforce," he turned his eyes toward the ceiling, his voice carrying the weight of something carefully rehearsed to sound completely unrehearsed. "I've always been completely alone." He turned back to look at her. "You're the first person," he said softly, "who has ever genuinely cared about what happens to me." His fingers found her wrist. Cold, thin fingers, the hands of someone who had just come back from somewhere terrible, burning with fever against her skin. "President Vane." His voice dropped to barely above a breath. "Tonight. Could you stay?" Chapter 8. Lyra looked at the hand around her wrist for a long time. The monitor blinked its soft green rhythm beside the bed. Out in the hallway, a nurse rolled a cart past the closed door, the wheels clicking quietly against the tile. At last, she withdrew her hand. "It's good that you woke up," she said. Her voice was calm and very flat. "Now I know you're all right. I can stop worrying." She stood. "I should get home." He froze. She pushed the chair neatly back into place and moved the cup of water closer to the edge of the table so he could reach it without straining. Her movements were unhurried and methodical, the way a person moves through the final steps of something they've already decided. "Now that I know you'll be fine, I can breathe again. I'll arrange a full-time caretaker for you." She paused at the door. "When you're discharged, I'll prepare a settlement for you. After that, you should leave this city." He sat up fast, too fast, and the movement tore something open somewhere and made his face go white. No. It was a raw sound. Not a word, not a performance, just the sound a person makes when something they have been holding for a long time breaks apart at the seams. His eyes went red. Tears came, and these, for the first time, were real, not the carefully manufactured kind, not the calculated display he had deployed so many times before. These were from fury. From the unwillingness of a man who had walked through fire twice and arrived at the finish line only to find the door locked. Please, listen to me, his voice cracked completely. From the first day I saw you, you were my entire world. I don't care about any of it, being beaten, nearly drowning, none of it matters. I only want to stay close to you. Even as a nobody. Even in the smallest possible way. Please. In the past, those words would have worked. She had always responded to the particular shape of his helplessness. All it had ever taken was for his eyes to fill and his voice to break, and the softness in her would open like a window. Today was different. She looked at him. She looked at the tears and the shaking hands and the desperate, fractured voice, and what she felt wasn't pity. It was irritation. She thought about the fact that she was going to have to go home and face Damien. That the company already belonged to him now. That what remained of her life would need to be rebuilt from something smaller and quieter than what she'd had before. She thought about what it would take to stand in front of Damien and say, I understand now. I'm sorry. I'm coming home. She could not lose him. That wasn't a calculation. It was simply the truth she found at the bottom of herself when she stopped searching for anything more complicated. Ronan's voice continued, louder now, more desperate, the words tumbling over each other with the recklessness of someone who has nothing left to protect. She had already stopped listening. Focus on your recovery, she said. Goodbye. She pushed open the door and walked out without looking back. The moment the door clicked shut, the crying stopped. Just stopped. Ronan sat very still on the hospital bed for a long time. Then he reached for the 4-needle and pulled it from the back of his hand. A thin thread of blood followed it out. He looked down at the drops on the sheet without expression, then wiped his hand slowly across the fabric. 6 months of meticulous effort. The early morning coffees left at her desk. The coincidental appearances in the lobby timed to her exact schedule. The night she mentioned craving crawfish at 2 in the morning, he had gone to 6 different restaurants, just to give her the feeling that someone had heard her before she even knew she'd spoken. He had studied her the way you study a map before crossing difficult terrain. He had nearly died for it. Twice. And now she was walking away. His fist tightened around the blood-stained bedsheet. The knuckles went white. No. He hadn't lost yet. Cross, you'll pay for this. Lyra, everything I was owed, I'll take it all back. Chapter 9. On the drive home, Lyra played a song they used to listen to years ago, back when the world had been smaller and she had known exactly where she stood in it. Her fingers tapped a slow, distracted rhythm against the steering wheel. She tried to push the antiseptic smell of the hospital from her mind. She wanted to see Damien. She wanted to sit in front of him and find the right words for what she needed to say. I'm sorry. I understand now, all of it. I accept what I did wrong. And I promise you, he won't be in our lives again. Not ever. She pressed his speed dial shortcut. Busy signal. Again. Still busy. The wrought iron gates of the villa caught the early morning light as she turned up the drive. She pulled to a stop in the sensor zone and waited. The gates didn't move. She honked. No response. She got out, walked to the intercom, and pressed the button 3 times. A long pause, and then a voice came through, careful and uncomfortable. Miss Lou. Lyra's hand went still on the panel. Edmund, the butler, had worked in this house for 11 years. He had never once called her anything but madam. Open the gate, Edmund. Let me in. Another pause. He appeared on the other side of the iron bars, and she realized he was holding a document envelope. He extended it through the gap between the bars and looked somewhere past her left shoulder as he did. She opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first, a finalized divorce certificate. The second, the company transfer agreement, stamped with her company's official seal. Already effective. Already legal. Edmund. She heard her own voice going thin and strange. What is this? Ma'am. He still wouldn't meet her eyes directly. Mr. Cross has given instructions. You are now considered a visitor to this property. And visitors are not permitted to enter without authorization. Visitor. The word landed in her chest like something physical. What are you talking about? Her voice climbed despite herself. This is my home. She pushed past him and seized the iron bars with both hands, rattling them hard. Damien. Her voice rang across the villa grounds. Come out. Let me in. Damien, please. The automatic sprinklers turned in slow arcs. The curtains hung perfectly still. The master bedroom on the upper floor, the room where she and Damien had shared 7 years of mornings, was shut tight. Edmund stood in silence a few feet away. He said. Edmund swallowed. Mr. Cross asked me to inform you that the transfer agreement has taken full effect. The company is now under his management. I don't want the company. She turned, and there were tears on her face now, finally falling. I want him. Edmund, please, just go tell him I want to see him. Just once. Tell him I'm not asking for anything else. Just once. Edmund's expression carried the specific grief of a man caught between two loyalties he cannot reconcile. Mr. Cross said he won't see you, ma'am, he said quietly. He asked me to tell you, if you continue to push, your situation will only become more difficult. You should go. The sound stopped leaving her. She stood with her hands still around the iron bars. Not squeezing. Just resting. The villa grounds lay in the pale morning light, the old garden, the stone path, the shuttered windows of the life she had lived inside them. She stayed for a long time. Then she left. That afternoon, my office line rang from the reception desk downstairs. The background noise was chaotic, raised voices, shuffling, the particular energy of a lobby losing its composure. President Cross, the receptionist said, her voice tight with anxiety, there's a man in the lobby causing a scene. He says the company owes him wages, and he's saying he won't leave until he sees President Vane. What should we do? Bring him to my office, I said. Tell security I said so. It seemed Ronan hadn't yet realized that Lyra's company now had a different name on the ownership documents. Chapter 10. He arrived 15 minutes later, dragged in by 2 security guards. He shook them off the moment they pushed him forward, straightened the collar they'd pulled crooked, and told them he could walk himself. He was still in rough shape, bandages around his head, a deep bruise across one cheekbone, a slight drag in his step. But his expression was completely intact. He made it to my desk in 2 steps and planted his hand flat on the surface. Cross. What are you doing here? He looked around the office as if expecting to find someone behind me. Where's Lyra? Tell her to come out. He straightened slightly. And where's my salary? Last month's wages still haven't been paid. I glanced up from my documents, once, and returned to them. I'm telling you, if you don't pay what you owe me today, I walk out that door and I start talking. A ruthless employer refusing to pay a worker's wages. Your massive company can't manage $8,000 a month. He limped to the sofa and dropped into it heavily, crossing one leg over the other, his posture projecting a studied contempt he had clearly spent years perfecting. He stared at the ceiling. I ignored him. I was waiting for a report I had requested. A full review of his 6 months at the company, every transaction, every recorded benefit, every gift or payment that had passed through him during the period he'd been in Lyra's orbit. Men like him always left a trail of what they'd taken. And I intended to recover every cent. 3 knocks. My assistant entered and placed a folder on the desk. I opened it. The report was thin. A single page. I read through it without change of expression. By the 3rd line, I was frowning. Across the room, Ronan noticed. A slow, cold smile moved across his bruised face. Looking for dirt, President Cross? I think you're pointing the flashlight in the wrong direction. I finished the page and closed the folder. 6 months of employment records. $4,000 a month during the 2-month internship period. $8,000 after full hire. Not a cent more. Attendance record, perfect. Conduct record, clean. No complaints from clients. No financial irregularities of any kind. No gifts received. No kickbacks taken. Not a single transaction that couldn't withstand examination. Judged purely on the paper in front of me, he was a model employee. I set the folder down and looked at the young man sprawled on my sofa, head still bandaged, legs still ailing, face still wearing that immovable arrogance, and I asked him honestly. What do you actually want? No anger in it. Genuine curiosity. And don't give me the true love speech. He sat with it for a moment. Turned it over. Tasted it. Then he unfolded his leg, leaned forward, and propped his elbows on his knees. You think I'm like everyone else, he said. There was something almost contemptuous in the way he said it. Pocket a few gifts, skim a little off the top, call it a win. He shook his head slowly. That's not money. That's charity. He paused. What I was building was a persona. Do you understand? I said nothing. I waited. The capable, incorruptible, talented young professional. Clean. Principled. Willing to work for almost nothing because he believes in something bigger than himself. He tilted his head slightly. You think refusing gifts is easy? Anyone can accept a gift. The hard part is refusing them. Making her believe that I was above that sort of thing. That I didn't want what other people wanted. He held my gaze. What I want isn't salary. It isn't kickbacks. It isn't items from her closet or a seat at her table. He let the weight of the next words settle before he said them. What I want is her. And once I have her, everything you own. Including the chair you're sitting in right now. All of it becomes mine, eventually. His eyes didn't move from mine. I don't want scraps. I want everything. Chapter 11. He had finally dropped all of it. The warm smile. The careful deference. The perfect, practiced proportion of everything he had ever allowed me to see of him. All of it had been performance from the very beginning. You nearly died twice, I said, leaning back in my chair. And yet here you are. Aren't you afraid of it? He stared at me. Then he laughed, hard, until the cut at his temple split open again, a thin thread of blood tracking through the gauze. He laughed until his eyes went wet and his voice cracked and the sound filled the office with something raw and completely unhinged. Then it stopped. He wiped the blood away with the back of his sleeve and leaned forward, voice low and stripped of everything unnecessary. Afraid of dying. He almost laughed again, stopped himself. I'm far more afraid of staying poor. A beat. My life has been worthless since the day I was born. So what is there to protect in something worthless? You take risks. You change your fate. Some people never even get the chance to gamble. He raised one finger and pointed toward the door. She's my chance. She's the highest branch I'll ever be able to reach in this life. Risking everything for it, why would that seem strange to you? I looked at him for a long moment. He had never been after money. From the very beginning, Lyra was a mechanism, a bridge to carry him across the distance between what he was born into and everything he believed should have been his. Emotion was only a tool. Morality was only a weight. Even she was not a person to him, she was an architecture, a means of ascent. Where is she? His voice changed abruptly. The earlier intensity fractured into something rawer and more desperate. Make her come see me. His eyes were reddening again. I don't believe she can actually cut me off completely. She was beside me for 2 days while I was unconscious. She stayed. That has to mean something, it does mean something. His voice cracked. Make her come. If she abandons me now, then I genuinely have nowhere left. Nowhere. I looked at him for another moment. Then I smiled, small and quiet. You won't be seeing her again, I said. But I can offer you a different opportunity. He stilled. Looked at me warily. What kind? I happen to have a contact running a very profitable route in Southeast Asia, I said, turning the pen slowly on my desk. High risk, obviously. But the returns are exceptional for those with the right kind of nerve. The silence that fell was total. I watched the color drain from his face, slowly, completely, like water leaving a glass. Southeast Asia, he repeated. His voice had gone very thin. That's right. You mean the kind where people go and sometimes don't? He couldn't finish it. No. He pushed himself up from the sofa. He was backing away, stumbling, one hand out. No, I'm not going. Beat me unconscious if you want, I'm not going. If I die, I'll die here. Not there. You can't. It's not really a decision you get to make. I leaned back and clapped my hands once. The office door opened. 4 men in black entered without a word and moved into position with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this many times and have no feelings about it. 2 of them had his arms pinned before he'd taken another step. You have no right, let go of me, I raised one hand. A guard pressed something between his teeth before he could finish the sentence, and then he was simply dragged toward the door, shoes leaving long streaks across the tile, bandages beginning to unravel, a thin smear of blood following the path they took. The elevator doors parted. His muffled voice echoed up through the gap for a few seconds, wordless, desperate. Then the doors slammed shut, and the office went quiet. I sat alone for a while. Everything had been resolved. For the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I felt completely at rest. Chapter 12. By the time autumn ended and the city folded into the sharp quiet of early winter, the parasol trees along the main roads had shed most of their leaves. The air carried a permanent dry chill, and the afternoons had grown short and pale. I hadn't made any deliberate effort to follow Lyra's life after everything ended. But news has its own way of traveling regardless of what you intend. Someone mentioned, in passing, that she was working as a cashier at a supermarket chain on the west side of the city. Someone else said she had rented a small apartment, 40 square meters in an old residential building a few blocks from the market. She was still reaching out through mutual friends. Still sending the same message, one way or another. I never betrayed him. Tell him I never did. One afternoon, when I happened to have time, I drove across the city. She was in the stocking aisle, arranging bottles of laundry detergent along the lower shelf. She wore the store's red and white striped employee vest over an old pair of jeans. Her shoes were plain canvas flats. Her hair was tied back loosely, with several damp strands stuck to her temples. She was thinner. The angles of her face, her cheekbones, her jaw, had sharpened into something she hadn't worn before. She turned around and saw me. The bottle slipped from her hands and hit the edge of the shelf with a hollow thud. She caught it before it fell. Her lips moved, the shape of a name beginning to form, then the sound didn't come. I walked toward her slowly and stopped a few feet away. Stop sending messages through our friends, I said quietly. You're putting them in a difficult position. Why? Her voice broke immediately. Her eyes went red. She reached toward my arm instinctively, and stopped, her hand hovering in the air between us, not quite touching. I never betrayed you, she said. You know that. You never betrayed me, I agreed. She looked up at me quickly, startled, maybe, that I was conceding the point. So then. But feelings change, I said. Not actions. Feelings. You didn't sleep with him. You didn't do anything, technically. But can you honestly tell me your feelings stayed exactly where they were? Can you tell me that if he hadn't provoked me, if I hadn't caught on early enough, you would have been able to stop yourself? I can. I don't believe you, I said. It was quiet. Not cruel. Just true. I will never be able to trust a woman whose heart has already begun to move. Even if she didn't know it herself. I looked at her one last time. She was standing in a supermarket aisle in her work vest with laundry detergent beside her and tears sliding quietly down her face, and she was still the person I had chosen a long time ago, still recognizable in the line of her jaw, in the particular way her hands hung at her sides. Still the person I had carried carefully for years. Honestly, I said softly, I think the life you have now is fine. It suits you, in its way. I won't do anything to make it harder. I paused. But I won't help you, either. I turned around. Her breath caught behind me, the sound of someone trying not to break completely in a public place, trying to hold themselves together for just a few more seconds. I heard it. I kept walking. I didn't look back. From that day forward, I never heard her name again. She had stepped off the edge of my world, quietly, without announcement, the way certain seasons end. Some things can't be returned to, no matter how much you once wanted them to last. The only way left was forward.